Welcome everybody, I'm Jeremy John, and I want to take you into the fascinating world of tour guiding. Every day in London, you'll find eccentric personalities guiding people in the footsteps of history. Some show historic architecture to overseas visitors, while others bring history to life for school groups. All the best tour guides have one thing in common. They know how to tell a good story. And that's why I started this podcast, to capture the stories of these tour guides. You will find out what drew them to this profession. You will discover which sites they love the most. And you will hear the secret methods they use to make history come alive. Today I have two guides on the show. I've got Nigel Smith.
Hello.
And I've got Adam Scott-Goulding.
Hello.
Now, I've got both of these guides on for a reason, and that's because they give a whole range of fascinating tours. Tours which are slightly off the beaten track and a bit different to some of the typical tours you'll often come across advertised in London. So I'm going to ask each of our guides first to just tell us which tours they give. So I'm going to start with you, Nigel. Which tours do you give in London?
So I do sort of history, social, cultural history tours based around the area of Islington and Clerkenwell, sort of North London, out of the centre. Just launched a tour there called the Slow Horses Tour. A lot of the TV show was filmed around there. But the thing that I specialise in is the history of cinemas and cinema going across the capital.
Oh, that sounds fascinating. I can't wait to get into that. Adam, which tours do you give?
Well, I go under the name of London Music Tours, and I lead music-themed tours all over London. So everything from the Beatles to George Frideric Handel, all periods, all genres, all music.
That really is all period. George Frideric Handel, we're talking 18th century pianist, composer. Was it the piano he played? It was a harpsichord?
18th century composer, yes. My wisecrack that I like to make on every single tour is he's the greatest Englishman ever born in Germany. Everything he's famous for was done here. That's not too controversial a thing to say. But yeah, all music all over town.
Wonderful stuff. Well, I can't wait to hear more about this. Before we go into these tours specifically, as is the case on each episode of this podcast, it's always nice to hear the backstory about how our tour guides ended up in this profession, in this field, because for some reason, every single one has got an entirely unique story. So let's start with you, Nigel, please. Can you tell me how on earth you ended up becoming a tour guide?
Yeah, of course. So I've been a guide since 2022, so not a huge amount of time. Prior to that, I was very lucky to have a job sort of 10 years ago that involved quite a bit of travel. And I'd find myself, traveling overseas, and I'd find myself in a city that was unfamiliar with. And the thing I'd find myself doing on my own was I would often go on guided tours. And so that was definitely a seed of me thinking, oh, I think I wouldn't mind having a crack at this. And then the interesting thing about the cinemas is I live in Tufnell Park in North London, and there was some sort of arts festival, and an artist, photographer, a guy called Sam Nightingale, did a guided walk from one end of Holloway Road to the other. Now, if those of you aren't familiar with Holloway Road, it is not the prettiest of, once called the Oxford Streets of North London, but few people would claim that now. And he did this tour all about the lost cinemas of Holloway Road. It was a miserable October day. There's one cinema that's visible on Holloway Road. There's one pub that you could tell used to be a cinema, and that is it. And we were 2 hours. And I thought, if somebody can make this interesting in the drizzle, then there's something in this. So I think it was those two things of sort of seeing going on other people's tours and thinking, I think I'd like to do this. And this idea of sort of, you can reveal this hidden history of something that I was interested in. Those were the seeds. And then I discovered Islington and Clerkenwell, a guiding course. I took that course. I was planning to take it before the pandemic. Pandemic put pains to that. So I eventually took the course after the pandemic. And the first tour that I ever designed, ran, was all based around cinemas in Islington. And it's all sort of come from that.
That is lovely. Can you say again the name of that tour guide who inspired you?
He was actually an artist. So he's an artist called Sam Nightingale, and he's a photographer. He'd done a project called Islington's Lost Cinema, and he took photographs with sort of a Victorian-style kind of plate camera, large format camera. And he would take pictures of buildings where a cinema had once been. So it would be something like Sainsbury's Local, but it would say the Regal, 1912 to 1929, but because they were taken, they looked like Victorian photographs. It was very, very evocative. So that was sort of a scene. And then I was so taken by that, we wrote an article together about lost cinemas in another part of London, in Kentish Town. So I got to know him. So I've always sort of cited him as a inspiration, because he wasn't a tour guide. He was sort of just talking about his art and this research that he'd done from one end of Holloway Road to the other.
Wow. Wow, what a seed to have been sown. And little did you know when you woke up that day to go on that tour. In fact, it sounds like your expectations were actually of the opposite, that you thought, oh, it's a bit of drizzle. Did you nearly cancel?
I would never have cancelled because, well, I'm sure we'll get into this. It was a one-off. It was a niche that I was interested in. Come rain or shine, I was going to go.
Fantastic. I might start advertising my tours as a one-off. This is the last one I'm ever going to do. And yes. Well, I want to now ask Adam about how Adam ended up in tour guiding. I'm guessing it didn't end up with an artist who was a photographer and who took you down the Holloway Road, did it?
Not exactly, no. I'm sure my story is a very, very common story. I'm an accidental tour guide. I used to be a journalist. I was a freelance arts journalist, ending up in tour guiding, looking for a way to continue telling stories in a different context. I tripped up and landed in tour guiding by accident through the inspiration of my wife, Karen, who's a Blue Badge guide. She's been a Blue Badge guide for 25 years now. And I've been guiding tours now for, well, almost 21 years. I'm nearly 21. I'm nearly old enough to be out on my own on tours. So yeah, I'm sure that's a common story. You've heard that a million times. An accidental tour guide came in through another career. Actors and barristers are often washed up in the tour guiding world as well.
We get all sorts, and I don't think I've ever come across someone who married into tour guiding. Did you marry before becoming a tour? Can you just go back to what's happened here? So where did you meet? This isn't a podcast really about falling in love, but where did you meet your wife? So we've got context as to how this developed.
Everything's a podcast about falling in love. My wife and I, we've been married for 25 years. We met when we were working in the theatre a long, long time ago, in a rep theatre in Scotland called Perth Theatre. I was a stage manager and she was an actor. And so when she was looking around for something to do with her related skills, communication and storytelling, she decided to explore that avenue. And when my journalism career came a cropper, I just followed her into what is now a small family business. So yeah, she's my inspiration in all things. How soppy is that?
Well, that is soppy, but it's also intriguing as well. I think that's the sweet spot for a romantic comedy, isn't it? Soppy and intriguing. But I'm curious then. So, I mean, obviously you're saying this is off the back of the journalist career not going where you expected. But there's always a sort of carrot and a stick. So the stick beating you was like, oh, I've got to get a new job, a new direction. But what was the carrot that led you into it? What was the moment where you thought, oh, I could?
I think always having been interested in communicating, always have been interested in writing, always been interested in telling stories. And I've always been just an appalling show-off as well. So I was never an actor. I was never a trained thespian, but I do like to stand up on my hind legs and tell a story. And I wonder, I really don't think I would have thought about myself unless I'd had, like you, Nigel, bumped into a bolt from the blue inspiration. I don't think tour guiding would have occurred to me if it hadn't been for my wife.
It's now time to get into much greater detail about the tours that you give. So I'm going to go back to Nigel now. And Nigel, I'd like you to speak a lot more about these cinema tours, because you've talked a lot about your inspiration that came from the artist, that photographer who really blew your mind that day and set a kind of template, perhaps, or at least a seed, as you said, for what you wanted to grow. Can you please go into more details about the tours that you give, which are cinema tours?
There's 4 tours that I do in different corners of London, exploring this idea about cinema going and cinemas. So I've got to be clear. People are like, oh, well, there's not many film locations of Camden. I'm like, no. We're not always talking about locations. We're talking about the buildings, the cinemas that are still visible, the buildings, or have been, in many cases, demolished. So I'm really interested in that and the active people going and watching movies. I first went to the cinema. I was 4 years old. Superman 2, starring Christopher Reeve, was the first movie, and it had an enormous impact on me. I even remember one of the trailers, Clash of the Titans, the Ray Harryhausen stop motion animation, and that sort of cast a spell over me. And I've been like, I've loved film, but I've loved going to the cinema ever since. And what was fascinating, the first tour that I developed is around the history of cinemas in Islington. We start by Angel Tube on the Northern Line, and we finish at an amazing building called the Carlton Cinema, opened in 1930. It's one of the most bizarre buildings in all of London, incredible Egyptian style facade. It's now an evangelical church, but I also lead tours in that building. So I've come to an arrangement with the church, the current owners of the building. So I do a tour inside that building. It's a Grade 2 listed building, interior and exterior. But what was interesting developing that first tour is film is it's a Victorian invention. The first films were shown in London in 1896, what's now the Regent Street Cinema on Regent Street near to the BBC. And they were shown not in cinemas, but in theatres, in music halls, silent movies. And Islington, this area, has got a lot of that Victorian history. So there's a bookshop in Islington that used to be a music hall. There is a building that Londoners may know called the Business Design Centre, modern 80s building, but built around the shell of a 19th century building called the Royal Agricultural Hall, one of the first places to watch movies. So the story that I'm telling in Islington is very much, or a lot of it is about these early years of cinema. And then the second tour that I developed around cinema is in Acton, of all places. West London, not an area that many tourists will find themselves in. But I have a friend who set up a community cinema there called Act One. It's in an old library building. And he said to me, well, you should do one of these tours around us. There were loads of cinemas here. And I'm like, were there? So yeah, I mean, all of them have been demolished, but there were. And I developed a tour there, and it was just a different story because the cinema going there was sort of early 20th century, 1920s, 30s, and there is still a beautiful 1930s building, the former Dominion Cinema, which you can see in Acton. And my kind of worry when I was developing these tours, all about essentially one theme, was, am I basically going to be doing the same tour, but just in a different part of London? And what's been, thankfully, a revelation is that hasn't been the case. So I do a tour in the West End, Leicester Square, Piccadilly Circus. There's a lot of stories about the premieres that happened, all of the big Hollywood glitz and glamour, the royal family, all of that sort of stuff happening. I do a tour in Camden Town. Adam will be familiar with an area more associated with music than film. But again, it's got a rich history there. And currently developing a new tour, the Lost Cinemas of Soho, where we are right now. Now, those of you who know Soho, a very different story than the glamorous West End.
In what way?
When I started developing my and researching my cinema tour of the West End, it was originally going to be Leicester Square and Soho. So Leicester Square, you've still got Empire Leicester Square, the Odeon Leicester Square, what's now the View, but these 1930s cinemas that are still visible and working cinemas. So, for instance, Empire Leicester Square, wonderful, famous image of the Queen, the late Queen, meeting Marilyn Monroe. So move from, the glamour of Leicester Square just a few blocks into Soho, and the cinemas that were there were showing, a very different sort of films very much catered to a adult audience, maybe, not just X certificate, but triple X.
That sounds very interesting indeed. And it seems like each of these cinema tours, despite having the theme of cinema, each of them you could go on and it's an entirely different experience. And I must say, I'm actually really looking forward to booking with you now. I want to now turn to Adam and talk about music tours. So tell me more about these tours that you give. You said you've been going for over 20 years now. Were music tours what you started out in, or is this something that you started doing later?
Okay, that's a very good question. I think, like a lot of tour guides, I started in tour guiding doing the popular tours. But my pet project, my favourite thing, my favourite subject is music, always has been. And there was a clear vista for leading guided tours in London on a musical theme. I think the big hitters, the most popular ones, inevitably the Beatles in London tour is a very popular one, and a general rock and roll London tour. So those are the ones I started with. In the past 6 or 7 years, I've been developing the programme to try and expand a little bit. I try and do at least one new tour a year. So typically I would write a new tour in the winter time, although I'm still leading tours all through the winter. When it's a little bit quieter, I'd write and research and put together new tours and then launch them in the springtime. So that's the seasonal pattern of them. But yeah, I think why music? Because I love music. That's why.
Great. Well, it's always nice to go on a tour with someone who loves the topic. And I think people can always tell. I think that applies as well with TV presenting and many other things. A few months ago, I had Richard Jones on the podcast, and he was someone who back in the 1980s designed a very popular Beatles tour. I'm curious as to where the tour goes and what you show people. So can you tell us a bit more about the Beatles themed tour?
Okay, yeah, where does the tour go? It depends. It depends on whether you're doing a public scheduled tour or a privately booked tour. Generally speaking, with a private tour, you can go wherever you like. Where do you want to go? I'll take you.
Well, presumably, though, it has to be Beatles related,
Sure, but the ethos being, if you've booked a private tour, we can cut your cloth accordingly. With a scheduled tour, the two major neighbourhoods, Soho and Marylebone. Inevitably St John's Wood as well for the Abbey Road studios and the accident black spot of Western Europe, the Crossing. Yeah. But Marylebone is a very, very, very Beatley neighbourhood. Nigel, you hit on something quite interesting there as well, I think. Trying to find a blend of stories and history and deeper history mixed with stuff to see. Yeah. It's absolutely crucial. Marylebone's an interesting neighbourhood, but it can be quite bland to look at. It's quite sort of samey, residential. So in those contexts, you're really relying on good storytelling techniques, I think, in a neighbourhood where there's maybe fewer exciting show business visuals. But yeah, Marylebone is a big neighbourhood for the Beatles. Soho, inevitably, anything to do with entertainment, cinema, music, theatre, all roads lead to the West End. So those would be the two big neighbourhoods for a Beatles tour, I would say.
So you're saying the Marylebone tour really... Is it Marylebone or Marylebone? I've heard a million debates about this.
Let's have a heated debate. Marylebone, do you want to have a go, Nigel?
I'm not going to get into it.
All right. Well, we'll just call it that area north of Mayfair.
Fantastic.
Okay, so in Marylebone, you're relying a lot on the storytelling here to bring the Beatles to life. Soho, then, would you say because Soho is so exciting that you feed off the architecture and energy of Soho as you go around? As much as the storytelling?
Do you know, one of my things, and I keep repeating this, a guided tour is a play with 10 intervals. And so the gaps between the stops are the route that you plan, the route that you take is just as important as the content that you're delivering to your walkers or clients or guests, because people can spot things for themselves between stops. Not necessarily to ask you about them, but maybe to file away for later on, thinking, oh, nice coffee shop, I'll go back there after the tour. Also, you're getting a rest, you're getting a little break from your presentation, like an interval in a theatre play. And so in a neighbourhood such as Marylebone or Belgravia, where the domestic architecture is quite samey, the intervals in the play are not as dynamic as the intervals in Soho, where when you turn every corner, there's something fresh for the eye.
Right, fascinating. So it's the between the stops that you're thinking of.
Do you know what I think? So, and is this heresy? Because you should be on a tour to listen to the tour guide. The tour guide is God. But, you know, the gaps, the spaces, the old blues thing, it's where you don't play. You know, the gaps between the stops can be just as valid for you walkers, I think.
I think it's so interesting when you're talking about that in terms of designing, when you design a walk. This Slow Horses tour that I've just done, I actually do it with another guide. We do it as a double act, which is quite unusual. And literally just changing the route slightly longer, you know, by 100 meters or so, but more visually arresting. I always love, on the West End tour, my West End Cinemas tour, the reveal of what used to be the Carlton Haymarket, sadly closed in 2023. But the way we get there and you sort of see this sort of sorry cinema that is still this beautiful building, it's really emotional when people walk down that street. And I love what you said about the way people like discover that stuff for themselves, but it's also a really satisfying part of our job. There's a million ways we could get there, but designing the route that adds something to the whole experience, I think, is a really important part of guiding.
Absolutely.
Something the listeners wouldn't know about our two guides here, but which they might be starting to pick up on, is actually both of our guides here also teach tour guiding. And you're hearing some insights into the kind of things there which they would advise newbie tour guides to pay attention to. And that's a great insight, is to think about between the stops just as much as the stops themselves. I want to get into more detail actually about your teaching and also about your top tips for people as well. Just before I do, I just want a little bit more detail about these music tours. And the reason is, I think some listeners may be wondering, is there music on the tour? Have you got a speaker that you carry around that's pumping out Let It Be? Or you tell us a bit more generally about how that plays out.
Is there music on the tours? Well, one of the ways that I provide music for the walkers, guests, clients, have we agreed on a specific phrase for, what do we call the people on the tour? Walkers.
Well, everyone's got a different term. Visitors, I use.
Visitors.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's call
Are you
them
okay with
visitors
visitors?
today. Well, yeah. Should we say visitors?
Well, we Adam and I were talking about this earlier. Because a lot of the stuff that I do is sort of so niche and local, I get very few tourists on my tours. Most people who come on my tours live in London or live near London. You know, I get very excited when somebody just come from I'm down from the weekend from, Manchester. So I tend to say people who come on the tour.
People who come on the tour.
which is, but I don't like, unless I'm doing a private tour, I don't really like client.
I'm not happy with clients either.
They're seldom are they
too corporate.
Seldom are they tourists, and I wish more of them were visitors. But so most of them are sort of fellow enthusiasts.
Sure. Yes, lovely people, whatever we call them.
Lovely people. Let's call them lovely people.
Yeah.
People. At the end of the tour, I usually do a follow-up email with a playlist of the stuff that we've been discussing on the walk. Extra bits, book recommendations, videos to watch on YouTube. And the other way that I use the email, if anything comes up on the tour that I don't have at my fingertips, then I can provide an answer via the email with the follow-up playlist. So that's one of the ways that I provide the music for the tours.
Great. And some of the locations you go to, I mean, we're now sat in Soho, so presumably somewhere like the former Trident Studios, which is not far from here, I'm guessing would be part of your route. And when you get to, say, a studio like Trident Studios, that's some incredible records from history have been recorded at, and you stop there with the group, what are you telling them about? Or what are you showing them? Or what is it you're trying to evoke on that stop?
That's a really good example as well. Trident Studios is in St Anne's Court in Soho, a tiny alleyway, barely room to swing a cat, as they say. And so what arrests your attention there is that there's now a BBC music plaque there dedicated to David Bowie. And because visually it's not much of a spectacle, the old Trident Studios, and because there's a big bright blue disc on the wall, that's where I start, because that's what arrests your attention. So start there. The albums that made David Bowie's name, were recorded at Trident Studios in Soho. And that's a pretty rich story. I do a David Bowie tour as well, and I call it David Bowie in 60s London. It's like David Bowie's archaeology, because it takes him a long time to get going. One of my favourite reactions from people on music tours is when I say that David Bowie made his first record in 1964. And people are surprised or shocked, because that's the era before David Bowie. That's the era of Beatlemania and all that stuff. But yeah, his first record was not a success. Neither were his second, nor his third. It takes him a long time to get going. So there's a rich seam of what I like to call David Bowie archaeology in Soho. His pre-title sequence, if you like to use a movie analogy. And so that plaque, because it's so bright, and it's absolutely the focal point of that location. That's where I would start there at Trident Studios.
Wonderful. So David Bowie's one of the characters that comes up on your tours, and you've got a specific David Bowie tour as well. Round the corner from there is Paul McCartney's offices, aren't there?
That's right, yeah. MPL, which is a terrific name for a company. It's a movie thing. Again, it's redolent of the golden age of cinema. And I think that's what he was going for. McCartney Productions Limited. Lovely looking, subtle building, lovely Art Deco flourishes. We don't have a lot of Art Deco in the UK generally. Yeah. And I think when we get a bit like cinemas, wow, it really pops. It really jumps out.
I did a tour earlier this year for the Art Deco Society.
Wow.
And I think they thought every building that we see would be this amazing Art Deco cinema in the West End. I did have to manage their expectations that we've got some, but it's not like there's around every corner you're going to see an amazing Art Deco building in the West End. Yeah.
Sure. McCartney's office is a really subtle one. It's lovely. He's a nuisance, McCartney. I mean, the king puts a flag up when he's at home, but I wish McCartney would, because then we'd know if he was in his office or not.
Has he ever come in and out of the office when you've done a tour there?
Not out of the office when I've been doing a tour there, but you do see him. Listen, don't let me create the impression that I'm buddies with Sir Paul McCartney. I'm not. I'm just like you. I'm just like everyone. I'm just a fan. But you see him up on his hind legs in London, walking around like a real boy, a very unassuming superstar.
Now, at the start of this podcast, you mentioned you also give music tours of Handel, and I'm really curious to know how it works with giving tours for musicians that are from, bygone eras. Tell me more about that.
Okay, yeah, the Handel tour. We would obviously visit Mayfair, where he lived, at Brook Street, but we would go back to 1711. Down in the Haymarket, when he popularised Italian opera here in London. Not everybody liked it. The critics, particularly the English critics, were pretty harsh, pretty down on Handel's Italian opera. So it's a rich vein of history, Georgian London. It's a popular vein as well. And we've still got a sufficient amount of sort of visual content as well, a lot of Georgian architecture to deal with. He's one of my favourite London characters. The water music, we trace that along the river from Whitehall, or at least trace where that began, the royal procession. The fireworks in Green Park, the fireworks music, very dramatic, with an explosion and a huge fire. Everyone loves that. We've not been very careful with fire here in London, historically. So I'm redeveloping that into a short series for the spring of 2026 called A Morning In. The series is A Morning In. So we're going to have A Morning in Handel's London. And we're also going to have a morning in Judy Garland's London as well.
Oh, talk to me more about Judy Garland.
Have you seen the movie, Renée Zellweger movie, Judy?
I haven't, to my shame.
It's dynamite, I think. Nigel, did you enjoy it?
Yeah, it's a fascinating part of her life that I think a lot of people don't know about.
Sorry, just be dynamite is a good thing or bad?
Dynamite's a great thing.
Okay.
Yes, it's a fantastic central performance. Sad story, because her story ends in London. She died in London. In 1969, she gave her last series of performances here in London. And so we've still got a lot of locations that we can visit. I'm anticipating the people who will be coming along on the tour will be the loveliest of things, devoted fans, and they'll have stories to share as well, because she's a beloved performer. We take the morning to do this. We'd flip between the West End and Chelsea using public transport as we go. We'd visit the location of the Talk of the Town nightclub. We'd swing by the Prince Charles Cinema.
You mentioned earlier that you always follow up your tours with a little email. There's a great video clip. Judy Garland performed on the Jack Parr TV chat show while she was here in London, and they filmed that at what was then Prince Charles Theatre before it was a cinema. And I always send people a clip of that afterwards.
Yeah, she's terrifically funny in that clip. She's really on.
Yeah.
I wonder, am I making it sound too sad? There's a lot of lasts in London for Judy Garland. Her last movie was I Could Go On Singing, starring Judy and Dirk Bogarde. It's the plot is a kind of Life Mirrors Art thing where she's splitting up with her husband, played by Dirk Bogarde, and they are warring over the custody of the children. Not a dissimilar story to the real life story of Judy Garland and Vincent Minnelli. And the world premiere of that movie took place right here in London at the beautiful Plaza Cinema.
Plaza, that's a spot on my West End tour. Londoners might know it. One of the things that is amazing about these cinemas when they were in their pomp in the 50s and 60s is, that premiere, huge advertising awning on the side of the building. Half of that building is not the most glamorous sort of view cinema. The rest of it is a Tesco Express. But one of the lovely things about that cinema was actually opened by Paramount Pictures. It was there. They had their offices there, their London offices. And one of the great things about doing tours, you'll know this as well, generally from your own work, is these revelations. You point out things at buildings people have walked past dozens of times. Plaza is a great example. If you look up right to the top of the Plaza, you'll see a ring of stars, Paramount Picture logo. You remember that from across the mountain. But I was doing a tour there. I've done this tour countless times. And somebody said, oh, yeah, I see you mentioned the stars, but just look closely. You can see the Paramount Mountain is also sculpted into the building. To my shame, I had never spotted that before.
That must be a subtle mountain.
It is pretty subtle, but the stuff you learn from, the interactions, you were talking about that, the interactions you have with the people on the tours can bring so much of it. Just down the road from there, I talked about cinema earlier, the former Carlton Haymarket. When I'm there, I talk about the premiere of Charlie Chaplin's last film, Countess from Hong Kong. Pretty obscure film. Very few people have seen it. It stars Sophia Loren and Marlon Brando. And I'm talking all about this, and it was very disappointing for Chaplin. And a woman says, I met him. I'm like, you met who? She goes, Marlon Brando. I'm like, oh, okay, well, over to you. And I just basically let her tell the story of where she had met Marlon Brando.
Yeah.
In Faversham, in Kent. Lovely market town. Yeah. And he was buying property in the area.
Wow.
She worked in a solicitor's office. He was coming in, big car. Next day, emailed me her photos of shared those with the group. So all of these lovely bits of serendipity that you get on tours is part of the magic. For us as guides as well as the people.
Yeah, for us as guides as well. We had a conversation a little while ago about, because I think we've got very similar guiding styles, you and I, in that we let or encourage a little bit of interaction. We like to hear from people as we go along. And if you can do that, if it's in your style, you don't have to do that. Some people are not comfortable with that as guides, but if you can do that, or if you'd like to experiment with it, I don't know, things such as that happen.
I think the thing that you and I have got in common in terms of focusing on music and focusing on cinema is they are communal experiences that most people, certainly the people who come on our tours, you're not going to come on a tour about cinemas unless you feel some sort of connection. So Prince Charles is a great example, one of the best loved cinemas in London, if not the country. So I always start the stop by just asking people, any memories, anything you want to tell me about, and the variety of stuff I've heard from the, bloke in his 60s who's telling about when he was a teenager, his sister taking him along there to see Emmanuel, to somebody in their 20s who went to the Adam Sandler all-nighter. Sure. All of these little things that, I completely encourage it.
You hit on it earlier on as well. I mean, obviously, we're audio here, there's no visuals, but when you talked about seeing Superman 2, your own personal memory of that. You lit up, your face lit up. That's part of you. That's part of your story. That's your possession. That belongs to you, and it's part of who you are and what you love. And music and film belong to the people that are on the tour. You know, the movie that you saw on your first date, the song that was playing for your first kiss, the song to which you walked down the aisle. These things are part of the people that are on the tour, and it can create a really special environment, I think.
Speaking of walking down the aisle,
Yeah.
if you want some more Judy Garland content,
Excellent. Always.
The first wedding in this country conducted at a cinema when the licensing laws changed, Odeon Leicester Square. The couple, the organ from the Odeon still in use, Get Happy. That was the song that was played as they walked back up the cinema aisle for their popcorn and champagne reception.
Fantastic.
So a little bit more Judy Garland content for you there, Adam.
Fantastic. Forget your troubles. Come on, get happy. Tremendous.
We're now entering the last part of this podcast where I really want to make best use of my time with both Nigel and Adam by talking to them about their role as teachers. Now, both Nigel and Adam teach tour guiding formally. And how long have you both been doing that?
I started doing it last year, so this year's been my first sort of full year of doing it.
Fantastic. And you, Adam?
I taught on the Westminster course for a period of about 4 years.
And you think you might get back into it at some point?
Do you know, very, very enjoyable, but I think going forward, as they say, I think I'm going to try and focus on the tour guiding.
Well, I'm so glad we've got you on then, because there's not going to be any other place that you're going to share this information.
It's a world exclusive.
It is a world exclusive, yes. Well, for this world exclusive, let's start with you, Adam. Adam, when you were teaching for 4 years, can you just give me a short summary on some of the things that perhaps a listener might not know? There's the obvious things, you know, turn up on time and also be enthusiastic and things like that. But can you digress about what you think makes a great tour and what you, in your 4 years teaching, like to impart on the trainee guides?
I think this is a common one. I think every tour guide would tell you this, perhaps. Show. Visuals. Show us things. Tell us things, certainly, but we need stuff to look at. As gorgeous as all tour guides are to look at, we need visuals on a tour. And sometimes when you're doing what I might call abstract content, talking about the history of music, talking about the history of cinema, you need to try and balance your tour, I think, with that sort of abstract content, with good visuals. Show us stuff. That would be my big watchword. I think that the other big one from a tutor's point of view is to remember that there's no one way of doing this. I mean, listen back to episodes of this podcast. There's no one way of doing this. Everyone has a different style. And so when working with a candidate for the examination, then you'd have to try and take into consideration their natural style and their natural gifts.
Yes, Nigel, I'm sure you'd agree with both of those points. And are there any other points that you would like to add as a teacher of tour guiding?
Certainly. I think one thing that's always really, really important to remember is that it's fundamentally a storytelling medium. It's not a long lecture on the street. It's about bringing these stories and facts and places to life and revealing something that people might not necessarily know. So people will come on Adam's tour because they know a little bit about the Beatles and want to learn a little bit more, or on my tours, they've loved cinemas and don't necessarily know all of the history, and they obviously get all that from the tours. It's about telling these stories that just hook people in and make the whole experience just something more. Because one of the things that we love about guiding and giving these tours is it's a completely, to my mind at least, unique way of storytelling. It's storytelling, location, history, place, and an experience. And that is something that you cannot replicate in a book or a documentary or indeed a podcast.
Before we finish, I think it's very important to mention how you can book with these two tour guides, because after listening to this, I certainly am going to be making a booking with both of them. So can you please advise me, both of you, how on earth am I going to book your tours? Nigel?
Yeah, you can find me at nigelsmithwalks.com and also on Instagram there. And I've got a website called Memory Palaces, which is all about the history of cinemas and cinema going in London.
And what about you, Adam?
Well, you can find me at londonmusictours.org, the website, and on all socials as London Music Tours, all one word.
Splendid. And I will put those links in the podcast description. And that does now mean that we've reached the end of this episode. So it's just suffice for me to now give a big thank you. So a big thank you to Nigel Smith.
Thank you very much. It's been great to be here.
And a big thank you to Adam Scott-Goulding.
Thank you very much. An absolute pleasure.
And of course, a big thank you to you, the listener, for tuning in. As always, if you've enjoyed listening, please do give it a rating of 5 stars if you haven't done so yet. And also click follow or subscribe if you haven't done that yet. There are many more episodes to come. But until the next one, take care. Cheerio.